You've probably wondered it out loud. After a video goes viral, after the obvious misconduct, after everyone agrees the officer should be gone, somehow he isn't. He's back on the street in months. People assume it's a cover-up or one crooked chief. It's worse than that. It's not a secret. It's written down in a contract, signed by the city, and it's perfectly legal. Tonight, we follow a single complaint from the moment it's filed to the moment it quietly dies, and you'll see every trapdoor built into the floor beneath it. Let's go back to a detail from the very first episode. Officer Dean, 12 years on the force, 3 commendations, and 1 excessive force complaint, dismissed. We breezed past that word, dismissed. Tonight it's the whole story. Because 2 years before he ever trained Marcus, a man named Andre filed that complaint. And what happened to it is the blueprint for what happens to almost all of them. Andre was stopped, slammed against a wall, and left with a fractured wrist over a case of mistaken identity that was cleared up 10 minutes later. No charges against Andre, just an injury and an apology that never came. So Andre did the thing we're all told to do. He filed a formal complaint with the department. He believed the system would look at the facts. Here's the first thing he didn't know. He had just entered a process designed, negotiated, and written specifically to protect the officer, not to find the truth. Trapdoor number 1, the waiting period. In many departments, the union contract guarantees an officer a delay before they can be questioned about a complaint. Sometimes 48 hours, sometimes more. Think about that. If you or I were accused of assault, we'd be questioned immediately. But the contract gives the officer days to review the evidence, talk to a union rep and a lawyer, and align his account with his partners. The investigation hasn't even started, and the deck is already cut in his favor. This isn't a loophole. It's a clause. Someone negotiated for it. The city agreed to it. Trapdoor number 2, who investigates? Andre's complaint goes to internal affairs, the department investigating itself. The investigators are officers. The people they're investigating are officers, and the careers of the first group depend on the goodwill of the second. Dean, having had his days to prepare, gives a calm, consistent account using all the right language. I perceived a threat. I used the minimum force necessary to gain compliance. The language we watched Marcus learn. Andre telling the messy, emotional truth of a real traumatic event sounds, by comparison, less certain. Guess whose account the report favors? Trapdoor number 3, the standard and the secrecy. The finding comes back months later in a single word. Unfounded. Not we investigated and Dean was justified. Unfounded, as if it never happened. Andre is told almost nothing about how that conclusion was reached. In many states, that entire investigative file is shielded from the public by law. Again, often a protection won through union negotiation. Andre can't see the file. The press can't see the file. The next person Dean stops can't see the file. The record is sealed, and Dean's history is clean again. Now here's where most people think the story ends. It doesn't, because there's a second machine that catches the rare officer who actually does get disciplined. Let's say a complaint is so undeniable that a chief actually fires an officer. You'd think that's the end. It frequently isn't, because the contract gives the officer the right to appeal that firing to an arbitrator. Understand what an arbitrator is. It's not a judge accountable to the public. It's a private, neutral party, often chosen through a process the union has a hand in, whose job is to rule on whether the discipline followed the rules of the contract. And here's the quiet catastrophe at the center of American policing. Study after study has found that a large share of officers fired for misconduct, by some research, around a quarter or more, are ordered reinstated through arbitration. Reinstated. With back pay. The chief fired them, the arbitrator put them back, and the city has to take them. Why? Often not because the arbitrator decided the misconduct didn't happen, but because of procedure. The city missed a deadline in the contract, or the discipline was inconsistent with how a different officer was treated years ago, or some clause wasn't followed to the letter. The misconduct can be real and admitted, and the officer still comes back because the contract turned accountability into a technicality. This is how you get the phenomenon researchers call the wandering officer, an officer fired or pushed out of one department who is quietly hired by another, because the record that would warn the new department is sealed, or because arbitration scrubbed the firing entirely. The same officer, the same patterns, a new town that has no idea. Investigations have documented thousands of these careers. The system doesn't remove dangerous officers, it relocates them. And layered over all of it is the thing that protects officers in the civil courts, too: qualified immunity. Even if Andre had sued, he'd have run into a doctrine that says an officer can't be held personally liable unless the violation was clearly established by a nearly identical prior case, which means novel abuses often go unpunished simply because no one was foolish enough to do that exact thing before in that exact way. The courthouse door is as heavy as the union door. Let's be fair and precise because this matters. Unions themselves are not the villain. Workers absolutely deserve representation, due process, and protection from arbitrary firing, including police officers. The problem is specific. When a union for people who carry deadly force and public authority negotiates contract terms that make it nearly impossible to investigate, discipline, or remove the dangerous few, the contract stops being a shield for workers and becomes a shield for misconduct. Due process is sacred, but due process was never supposed to mean no process. So picture Andre, 2 years before Marcus's first day. His complaint is stamped unfounded. The file is sealed. Dean's record reads clean, one complaint, dismissed. A sentence so small it fits in a single line of a training officer's bio. And because that complaint went nowhere, Dean is promoted to field training officer. He is judged trustworthy. He is handed a 23-year-old rookie named Marcus and told to show him how things really work. The failure to hold Dean accountable didn't just fail Andre. It created the teacher. It manufactured the next generation. Every trapdoor that protected Dean is the reason there's now a Marcus. That is the engine of this entire series. It is not a story about individual bad men. It is a story about a set of rules, written rules, public rules, negotiated rules, that guarantee the bad ones survive, get promoted, and train the next ones. When you remove accountability from a system, you don't just let the guilty walk. You teach everyone watching that the guilty walk. And they learn. Andre stopped trusting the process. Most people do. That's the final, quietest victory of the machine. Not that it beats you, but that it convinces everyone else it's pointless to even try. Next video. We go all the way to the top. The prosecutors and the district attorneys who are supposed to charge these officers, and the one relationship that makes sure they almost never do. Follow so you don't miss it.